A lot of people may not know this, but SIG has removed a lot of the console information that has been being parsed by third-party programs in order to fuel things like kill trackers and other more nefarious programs that were being used to hunt people down and track them in-game. Very recently, a very talented individual and member of the Star Citizen community named Yurts made a thread and released this program to the public that he made over on GitHub. This program used the same information that was powering kill trackers to also essentially exploit the information the game is giving you to hunt players down, see them where they're at in the world, and other very nefarious things. And as a result of this, SIG finally removed the information in the console. This has prompted players to speak out and talk about how they want the kill tracker aspect back, or how they want some of the information in the console to be displayed again. This thread is actually quite large, and a lot of players in this thread are asking, well, why can't we have our kill tracker back? Why is it gone? Blah, 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 blah. It's a very emotional and instinctual response to want a kill tracker. You may ask, well, what's the harm in it? What's the big deal? And if there was to be a kill tracker, I do not want it to be third party. I want it to be something official by SIG. As a matter of fact, I'd rather have no third-party tools whatsoever. But with all that being said, I am personally against the kill tracker. I am against anything that could be used to harass players, to dissuade players from taking fights, or just in general promote bad player behavior. And I'm not just talking about harassment bad, but actual gameplay mechanics bad. I have held an opinion like this for a very long time. I am actually against the KD stat being tracked in shooter games. My opinion on this was famous enough at the time to be featured in a PC Gamer article, which is on screen here. Typically in any shooter game, I am towards the upper end of the spectrum, typically within the top players. That was at least before I had my shoulder surgery, so perhaps that is not the case anymore. However, my opinion on kill trackers and KDA stats being tracked remains the same. They promote bad behavior. They do not encourage players to play the objective, for example, or to take risks. They definitely don't encourage players to take risks. The kill-death ratio stat is so heavily weighted and so strongly emphasized by players in games now that it will supersede anything else. You could have 40 kills and 15 objective captures, but if you've died 30 times in the process, people will point out the 30 times that you died and completely and totally disregard the victory that you helped your team achieve. That is how heavy the death part of the KDA stat is weighted, at least in the minds of players. It is also the only stat that is ever tracked that is negative. No other negative stat is tracked in these types of games. So because it is the only negative stat, players have a tendency, naturally, to try and keep that stat as low as possible. This is why some players prefer to camp instead of push objectives. This is why some players prefer to sit back and snipe instead of helping their team push forward. These are all problems that are in the session-based shooter FPS community, but these problems do also extend to MMO games and MMO FPS games. They also encourage players to do whatever is possible to get the most amount of kills, as opposed to doing what might be best for the team or for the game as a whole. Back when I played Planetside, I was notorious for farming kills. I would sit inside of HE tanks or liberators. I would camp spawn rooms. I would do whatever it took to make sure that my kill stat was always higher than my death stat. And a lot of that behavior came at the expense of enjoyment of others and the overall health of the game. That type of behavior would be no different in Star Citizen. People would still do the same. Is it hard to imagine that if a kill tracker, whether it was official or not, let's say it gets a leaderboard, the most amount of kills per week or per month or whatever, either way, the most amount of kills, is it really hard to imagine that players perhaps may go and pick on crappier players or perhaps individual industrial players? A kill is a kill after all, right? Maybe I want to go and camp Everest Harbor. I've done it many times in the past. Players will take off, I will gun them down before they can fight back. That's another kill for my tally. A kill's a kill, right? I go higher on the death tracker. What about for ground game? Maybe I want to go to Siege of Orison and gank players trying to do the mission. Or go camp out a bunker and just gank players trying to do the bunker. The point here is what I'm doing is farming kills. I am farming my stats. And I am using degenerative gameplay behavior in order to get those stats as high as possible. No longer am I playing Star Citizen for the Star Citizen experience, which granted right now is not very good, but it goes against everything you think that Star Citizen would be against. There are, of course, certain things that Star Citizen can learn from or borrow or expand upon from other games, especially shooter games, because it is, again, as I've said many times, an MMO FPS, but there are certain things that it should not incorporate. And I feel very strongly that kill death tracking is one of those things that it should actively avoid. If you've been playing other games outside of Star Citizen, you may have noticed that a lot of them now feature an anonymous mode, or the option to hide your stats so that people cannot look at them. The reason why these things exist is because they want players to be able to opt out of the stat tracking system, and they want players to avoid being harassed and picked on for how bad they are. A lot of players who play games, they're bad, and that's fine, but they are bad. We have to understand that. A bad player's money, especially if it comes with a monthly reoccurring fee, is just as good as a good player's money. But in games, it is very often that a good player can and will chase out a bad player. You cannot always avoid that. However, you can disincentivize it and put systems in place to help prevent it. So let's say Star Citizen does get a stat tracker system, official of course, from SIG. Will it have an opt-out feature? Will players be able to anonymize their names and prevent other players from seeing their stats? If so, what is the point of the stat system? It is already compromised. These types of things, anonymizers, privacy profiles, opting out, they are all a result of one very negative stat being tracked. And it's also the only negative stat being tracked. How many times they have died in the game. That is how strongly emphasized the D in KDA is in a stat tracking system. It is so powerful and so heavy that players will do anything in their power to avoid racking those Ds up. Much to the chagrin of their team, much to the detriment of the game or the match or the experience as a whole. And it is so heavily weighted that players would opt out of any stat tracking system if they can to avoid ridicule, bullying, or whatever you want to call it. You may say that I'm a wimp or I'm a baby for being against these type of things. But remember, I am typically on the top, and I'm telling you that stuff like this is bad for a game, and quite frankly, I don't think really has a place in Star Citizen, or most shooter games for that matter. But the final thing I want to say, and this does tie into it, is that we live in a society now that is very monitored, where telemetry is very important, and people have cell phones, and they're recording everything. People, at least in my experience, hate that. They hate the non-stop, constant tracking. And more often than not, they will always opt out of any telemetry or stat tracking, IRL, that they possibly can. Yet, here we are in games where some people are encouraging and promoting that. Essentially, when you have a stat tracker, much like in real life, players become a source of currency. They are no longer players, they are stats for me to farm, crops to harvest even. And this was the mentality in every game I played that had stat tracking. It would be no different here. So, if we do get stat tracking, I hope all of you PvE Carebears are ready to be farmed like carrots, because that's exactly what's going to happen. Because a kill is a kill, and it makes monkey brains feel good when number goes up.